Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror franchise movie review video. As part of my January 2023 series, where I'm taking a look at the entire Final Destination franchise. Um, so, the first two movies I reviewed, those are up on my channel if you want to check them out. Today, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the third movie in the franchise as part of my five movie collection here, of course. And that is Final Destination 3 from 2006. Um, so again, like the first two movies, this is a movie that I remember seeing probably a dozen years ago. Like all these movies I remember watching like in the 2000s, somewhere between 2000 and 2009. Obviously in this one's case, it would have been like '07, '08, something like that. But I don't think I ever watched this movie all the way through before until of course now for this video review. So in some ways this was kind of a new movie for me. There's a few things I remembered about it. I remembered this is the one about the roller coaster, and I remember that Mary Elizabeth Winstead was in it, who I'm a big fan of hers. So those are the two things that definitely really all I knew about it. I couldn't remember anything after the roller coaster. So anyway, let's just go ahead and get started with Final Destination 3 from 2006. So Final Destination 3 is a 2006 American supernatural horror film directed by James Wan, who's back from the. He didn't do the second movie, but he did the first movie. A standalone sequel to Final Destination 2. It's the third installment in the Final Destination film series. Wong and Glenn Morgan, who worked on the franchise's first film, wrote the screenplay that takes place years after the first film. Wendy Christensen, a high school graduate who has a premonition that a roller coaster she and her classmates are riding will derail. Although she saves some of them, death begins hunting down the survivors. Wendy realizes photographs she took at the amusement park contain clues about her classmate's death. With survivor and friend Kevin Fisher, Wendy tries to use this knowledge to save the rest of them and ruin Death's scheme. So it probably sounds kind of familiar to the first couple of movies. There's a certain pattern with all these movies, but with some variances. So we'll get into. So basically, the film opens in 2005. High school student Wendy Christensen visits an amusement park in Pennsylvania with her boyfriend Jason Wise and her best friend Carrie Dreyer, Carrie's boyfriend Kevin Fisher, and their classmates to celebrate their graduation. As they board the Devil's Flight roller coaster, Wendy has a premonition that the hydraulics securing the restraints and train cars will fail during the ride, killing everyone on board. She convinces nine people, including Kevin, best friends Ashley Frund and Ashlyn Halperin, alumni Frankie Cheeks and athlete Louis Romeo, and goth couple Ian McKinley and Aaron Ulmer, not to ride the roller coaster, but fails to save Jason and Carrie, who are among the remaining passengers killed in the derailment. Several weeks later, Kevin tells Wendy about the explosion of Flight 180 and the survivors' subsequent deaths, believing they may be in a similar situation. At a tanning salon, Ashley and Ashlyn are burnt alive in a malfunction. Let me start over again, okay? I'm trying to say too much here without getting my words right. At a tanning salon, Ashley and Ashlyn are burnt alive in malfunctioning tanning beds. Now convinced that death is stalking them, Wendy and Kevin set out to save the remaining survivors using omens hidden in the photographs of the survivors that Wendy took on the night of the roller coaster crash. When Wendy and Kevin pull into a drive-through restaurant and observe Frankie's photo, a runaway semi-trailer truck forces them to escape Kevin's truck before it collides. The collision causes the truck's engine to burst out of the hood and grill, killing Frankie, who was in the car in front of them, as the fan slices his skull. So yeah, that's the that's the setup and the premise for Final Destination 3 from 2006. As far as the cast goes, we have Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Wendy Christensen, Ryan Merriman as Kevin Fisher, Lemch, Chris LeMench as Ian McKinley, Alex Johnson as Aaron Ulmer, Sam Easton as Frankie Cheeks, Jesse Moss as Jason Wise, Gina Holden as Carrie Dreyer, and Texas Battle as Louis Romero. Also, Chillin Simmons as Ashley Fruand, Crystal Lowe as Ashlyn Halpin, Amanda Crew as Julie Christensen. So yeah, that's a big cast there. So that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for Final Destination 3. I really enjoyed this movie. I have to say, it's definitely they're three. This franchise is 3 for 3 so far in terms of my enjoyment and what I get out of these movies. This one is right up there with the first two for me. And yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it, starting with the things that I liked or the pros about the movie. So the first thing, and I didn't realize this before I watched the movie and did my research for this review, but James Wan is back, and when I watched the movie, it wasn't hard to tell that he was back because this movie, like the first movie, has a lot of that buildup of tension is back. The buildup of tension is back that James Wan is so good at. Between the opening premonition sequence and the tanning bed kills, those two instances mostly in this movie. There's a few other deaths and scenes in the movie as well, but you can just tell that James Wan has got his magic back in this movie. He knows how to build tension and get the audience on the edge of their seat. He did it in the first movie, especially the opening plane crash sequence, and he definitely does it in this movie. So that's the biggest thing that stood out. So when I saw that he directed this movie, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's why I enjoyed that aspect of the movie so much. So yeah, definitely the rise the not the rise the buildup of tension is definitely back in this movie. That's the first thing I noticed. I really like the leads here and their chemistry. Talking about Wendy and Kevin, those two characters played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Ryan Merriman. In fact, I would probably say all of these movies, you kind of have two leads that kind of have to lead the way to figure out a way to avoid death for all the remaining survivors. I actually think these two, I think I like the best out of all of them. Even the first movie with um, Alex and Claire, who were good. But I think I actually like the chemistry of these two, Wendy and Kevin, even better. And a lot of that has to do with the performances by Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Ryan Merriman. I felt like their characters and the chemistry they had was really earned. Um, and they were both really invested in these characters. It's interesting because, again, kind of like the second movie, they kind of take a bit of a turn at the beginning where you think that Wendy and her boyfriends are going to be the one to get off the ride, but actually her boyfriend ends up being on the ride along with Kevin's girlfriend, who the only reason these two know each other in the first place is through their relationships because Kevin's girlfriend happens to be best friends with Wendy, um, and I and then I think Kevin is friends with her boyfriend. So, of the four of them, these are the two that sort of knew each other the least and were just sort of there by happenstance. And those were the two survivors of the two main leads, I should say, the two main survivors. And I thought that was really interesting, both from a character standpoint and their performances, like I said, really sell it. They have good chemistry together. So that was definitely one thing I noticed. And as I said, I think it's my favorite twosome of the surviving leads of any of these movies so far. You got to talk about the kills, of course, some of the best in the franchise. In the franchise, boy, I'm having trouble talking today. Um, in terms of the blood and the gore, the build up and lead up to the deaths, and then just the overall the delivering the deaths effectively that we get. It's not one of those cases where there's a good build up and then we get the death, but it's kind of like, oh, okay. They really deliver on the deaths in this movie a little better than I think part two did, and part one really wasn't all about the death so much as it was about the buildup of tension. But this one, you kind of get the best of all worlds, in my opinion. I think the kills are some of the best in the franchise in that regard. They're very effective and very gory. Especially, there's one kill. Well, obviously, a lot of people talk about the tanning bed kill, which is definitely probably the best effects kill, I would say. I think the most gruesome kill is probably well, it's tough because there's a lot of good ones, but I think the like the fan blade through the back of the guy's head in the drive-throughs up there, and then also the weightlifting one, where these two weights come and just very effective, very very gory. So yeah, the kills are definitely a pro. I really like the end of this movie where we get another disaster premonition, which we didn't get in any of the other movies up to this point. It was really unexpected, and I don't that part I didn't remember from watching this movie about 12, 13 years ago. I don't know even know if I made it that far. I don't remember why I never finished it, but it's just kind of an unexpected and ambiguous ending. Ambiguous in the sense you don't really know what happens with these characters because they go through the whole premonition where it looks like they're all killed, and then of course it ends up being a premonition, and then they're all trying to stop the train before it gets going, knowing that their demise is to come, and that's when it cuts to the ending credits. I thought that was very effective, and it really leaves the audience on that sort of what happened and ambiguous sort of ending that we haven't gotten before. And I thought it was just a very effective way to leave the viewer. Of course, I also have to talk about Shirley Walker's score. I think it's probably the best score of the first three movies so far. It's got that really sinister and foreboding kind of score that we certainly got in the first movie, but I think it might be even better in this movie. It really creates that eerie tone right from the beginning of the movie, along with again some really well done opening credits and some symbols that are given, kind of very much like the first movie. I think this movie. Well, I'll get into this at the very end. What I want to kind of say in comparison here. I don't want to interrupt too much here. Um, I like the whole mystery aspect of this movie with the finding the clues in the photographs that were taken that night and the certain symbolism in the photographs of how each of them are going to be killed in which order. And also the order, they have to figure out the order that people were in the roller coaster because that's how they were going to die. Kind of much like the plane from the first movie. Yeah, this movie just has more of a mystery element to it that I really enjoyed, especially as the two main characters are trying to figure it out and using these photographs. That really worked for me, and it was kind of something a little different, even though the overall premise of these movies is the same in all the first three movies here, and I would assume the last two. I haven't seen them or reviewed them yet. And then and going on that point, I also like that this movie has less exposition. Now we don't get Tony Todd. Well, I shouldn't say that. Tony Todd's actually in this movie, but he's a voice in one of the amusement park sideshows. Or actually, it's like that big devil head, I think, as they're getting onto the roller coaster. So his voice is still in the movie, but he's not just thrown on screen like the first couple movies for an exposition dump. This movie doesn't really have exposition dumps. They bring up Flight 180 again, and they kind of think they're in a similar situation. They just kind of go from there. They don't have to have characters going back and forth and talking about this and that and what can it all mean. And so less exposition is definitely a plus. And then also they don't add additional rules and try to make it all convoluted like they did in the second movie. And I really enjoyed the second movie. Don't get me wrong here. But this movie reminds me much more of the first movie. I guess that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Is like the first movie and this movie are much closer together. The second movie was kind of, I felt like that tried to do its own thing. To many successes and a few failures, as you'll hear if you watch my review for that movie. But it's clear that James Wan and Glenn Morgan, who worked on the first movie, were back in this movie because this one's much more connected, like the first movie, in terms of certain things like the score, um, the buildup of tension, and not making it overly complicated. Just kind of going with what we know already. I mean, by the time you're in the third movie here, you know what these movies are about. You can have fun with them. So those are my pros for Final Destination 3. As far as getting to some cons, to be honest with you, I kind of wanted more from the overall roller coaster crash premonition. You get some pretty good shots, and there's one or two decent kills where people are like shoved off or a bar takes them off at the neck or something. But in terms of the gore and the kill, I guess I wanted more elaborate time spent on the overall crash. Um, Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just this watch. Maybe I won't feel that way when I watch it again. But I knew the roller coaster was a huge part of this movie to kick it off with the premonition. And I don't know, it just kind of left me wanting a little bit more than I got, especially in terms of the kills. You just see a lot of people flying off or falling down off the roller coaster, off the track, and then you see their bodies on the ground. It's fine. It's not a huge con, but it's definitely one that I was thinking as I was watching the movie and it ended. Also, the rest of the characters are characters aside from the main two that I mentioned, being Kevin and Wendy. They're pretty forgettable. They're pretty cliche. I mean, you got the two blonde bimbos basically that are just there. Even going into a tanning booth. I mean, it's so cliche and just some of it. And then some of them are over the top too, like the sort of the jock guy who gets killed by the weightlifting incident. He's just leading up to that death. It's just so over the top. And yeah, these characters, aside from the first two, aren't my favorite in the franchise by any stretch of the imagination. They're not as strong as the previous movies, in my opinion, as far as like side characters or like the characters throughout, not just the leads, is what I'm trying to say. There's some pretty obvious and bad CGI used in this movie, especially the green screen that's used during the roller coaster segment. Again, I mean, what else could they really do? They're not actually going to be able to shoot like a real practical roller coaster crash, I suppose. But it's pretty obvious that there's some CGI. There was in the second movie as well, in relation to some of the deaths. But yeah, there you can definitely tell more CGI in this movie. It was just kind of the time, that mid 2000s. You got a lot of the CGI that doesn't age all that well, doesn't look great. Then, of course, most people mention this. You got the plot hole regarding Frankie's camera, which is it's pretty hard to ignore. It's a pretty big plot hole with how the roller coaster breaks apart as this camera gets tied on the track, basically, as it falls out of his pocket. I just don't know how they missed that and didn't go back and edit it. But again, that's more of a nitpicky con. Overall, guys, I really enjoyed Final Destination 3. The first three I've really enjoyed. There hasn't been one that's been drastically better or worse than any of the other ones. But this one, like as I've said a few times in this review, definitely feels more like the first movie in terms of the tension and the build up leading up to the kills. And the kills themselves are outstanding. Like I said, the two leads really sell it for me. With now I already forgot his name. Um, Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Ryan Merriman. They both do a really good job, and their characters both are really good. So that's enough for me to give this movie an 8.5 out of 10. Just really enjoyed Final Destination 3 a little bit more than I thought I would, maybe. Well, it's not a perfect movie. None of these are perfect movies, but for what they are and what they give you, Final Destination 3 delivers just like the first two did for me. So 8.5 out of 10 for me for Final Destination 3 for 2006. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys think of Final Destination 3. I know it's kind of a polarizing Final Destination movie. Some people really like it. It's their favorite of the franchise. Other people, it's one of their least favorites of the franchise. I'm definitely more on the side where I can't say it's my favorite of the franchise. You'll have to wait till the end of the month to find that out. But it's definitely closer to the top of the franchise than the bottom. And I don't even know what the bottom is yet. I haven't run into it. Um, but yeah, please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below as well so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for this series. And be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my great horror content this series and beyond. So thank you for watching this review. I hope you're enjoying this franchise review series. Hope everybody's having a good New Year's and stay scared. Bye.